Welcome to New York Bio's virtual breakfast series, a digital program started in 2020 bringing you fireside chats with leaders from across the healthcare spectrum. This week's episode features Stan Kachnowski, the director of the Digital Health Program at Columbia Business School and the chair of New York City's HIT Lab.
For people who signed on time.
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. Hi, I'm Jennifer Hawksbland, and I'm the CEO at New York Bio. Welcome to our third virtual New York Bio breakfast. As many of you know, we've done these historically in person about once every other month, but we are totally taking advantage of everyone being at home and working remotely to do these conversations weekly. And that way we can include a lot more people, and we have a lot larger variety of guests that we can hear from, which is fantastic because we're not juggling logistics of in-person meetings for the very moment. Speaking of which, I hope you are all receiving our New York Bio newsletter. We're sending it out about once a week. We're not trying to inundate your inboxes, but want to give everyone information, the latest information, and also trying to keep you updated on the New York Governor Andrew Cuomo's guidance for reopening of the economy in New York. Yesterday the governor announced a tiered system and a series of requirements that must be met for different regions to open. And not surprisingly, downstate encompasses 3 separate regions. Even though a lot of people work in New York City, it still has 3 different regions with 3 different requirements. We'll be sending out that information so you can see where your region sits currently if you are in New York right now. And if you're in our region, we also have a regional consortium of governors that are planning to purchase different equipment and protective gear as a region to try and pull their purchasing power. So we've been seeing a lot of movement in the last few days on reopening the economy. As far as New York Bio events, our planning is a little bit further out. We're sticking with our current weekly breakfast series for the moment. We're looking to add some more individual one-offs with maybe some thought leaders in government. So we'll let you know when those come together. And then we obviously have our annual meeting coming up September 14th. When we canceled it for March 10th, we pushed it back far enough, we hope, that will allow for us to have a robust in-person meeting. But we'll certainly be working on that. Derek, I'm going to turn it back over to you to introduce Stan, and then we'll jump in with some questions with our guest.
Thanks, Jennifer. Sure thing. So good morning. I'm excited to have Stan on this morning. As somebody who, I've spent a long time going to a lot of different kinds of meetings and thinking about a lot of different kinds of groups in New York City. I first met Stan through HIT Lab, which is an organization that he's on the chair of. I've always been impressed with the events and the programs that they've been able to run. And they also, Stan also does exceptional work within Columbia Business School and is truly one of the leaders in the digital health community in and around New York City. As everyone knows, there's more and more bleed through between digital health and biopharma. And really the future is going to pair both of those things together. So Stan, we're really excited to have you here this morning. There's a lot we can talk about. And maybe just to get things started, you can give everybody a little sense of where you came from, how you started both between HIT Lab and Columbia, and just some of the progression that brought you to today through the digital health community.
No, that's great. And thank you, Derek. Thank you, Jennifer, for having me in the New York Bio community. Certainly, the progression of what we're seeing today of digital health and life sciences is unprecedented. We're used to seeing very slow and methodical adaptation of not just hospitals or physicians, but also life science companies into digital. And so it's great to be here today to talk about that and to hear about hopefully some great questions. We're looking forward to some questions from the audience about that. My background personally really comes out of a mix of computer sciences and social sciences. And so over the last 30 years now, stemming out from my training in these areas as an undergraduate and a graduate student, I've been teaching and researching in digital health, really biomedical informatics and bioinformatics. That is the definition of digital health. It's the bringing together of those two disciplines into one. and creating, as Eric Topol described, and when he kicked off the field and really initiated it in his 2012 book, The Creative Destruction of Medicine, this new field where you have a digital human. You have all the data from the human body, tissue, liquid, hair samples, skin, etc., that can be turned into data. And then you have all the data around the human body, whether it's an electronic health record or telemedicine or anything involving your Apple Watch or an app. That's all considered digital health. So if you talk to Alexa about your diabetes, that's digital healthcare. And if you talk to your cell phone about your heart condition, or if you ask questions about that, that's digital healthcare. And so really over the last 30 years, starting out at Quinnipiac University in their School of Business, and then being recruited into Columbia in 1996 in the School of Public Health, and then having now a few different positions within Columbia, but now serving as the Director of Digital Health for Columbia Business School's Executive Education Program, and also chair as HitLab. It's been really these 30 years of formative research. And if I can give you guys an indication of how it's changed so much, when I started teaching in 1991, my parents had no idea what I did. They had no idea what they thought it had something to do with health insurance. They weren't quite sure what it was. And then about maybe 15 years ago, the iPod came out and there was some healthcare stuff on that. And then the iPhone came out in 2007. They started seeing a little bit more. Then the Apple Watch came out and they were really into tracking some of their healthcare data. And now that we have this horrible crisis upon us, and we're looking at cell phones as one of the frontline containment and surveillance and triage, even to some degree supply chain management systems, and so much of that is driving our progress within healthcare, within life sciences, whether it's e-source, e-recruitment, e-consent. The mobile phone is a critical component of what's going on with life sciences and in virtual trials today. So digital health, my parents understand it now. They talk about their electronic health record. My mother is constantly sending me alerts from her Epic system. She lives up in Burlington, Vermont, and they just migrated over to Epic. And she's constantly on her personal health record, checking out her labs, checking out her data, that sort of thing. So they get it now. And I think that is, if anything, a harbinger. It's really a nice reflection of just how much digital health has become a mainstay just over my career. And now today in what we're doing with this crisis, it really is front and center in terms of how we're trying to combat this. And, for all the folks that are listening, it's obviously it's a very tough time, not just for our friends, our families, our colleagues, but also for the industry, just looking at how this is affecting clinical trials and life science industry.
Yeah, we've had a couple of guests on so far that have talked a good bit about clinical trials and some of the innovations that have been going on there. And Irfan last week basically said that there are so many clinical trials that are now really in rescue. And both Irfan and Craig highlighted the fact that as we move forward, especially if you see this COVID as really kind of a landmark crisis, if you will, it's really going to force people in clinical trials to think about how they're working with technology. How are they recruiting patients? How are they enrolling patients? What are their sites like? And it's really one of those events that really makes people change the way they're looking at technology and think about the things that they need to adopt in order to stay current.
Yeah, I think that you're absolutely right. And I think, we've been talking about this. I'm probably talking to 5 or 6 physicians a day who are doing clinical trials, and then another 5 or 6 folks on the life science side from life science companies who are doing clinical trials and working on this. And we can't imagine if this had hit us in 2003 or 2005 or even 10, how we would have responded to this. The advent of the smartphone and the diffusion of the smartphone is absolutely critical. And we're seeing it on our hospital side. So all the research that we're doing with hospitals and hospital systems and physicians, the work I do at HitLab as chair of one of the world's leading digital health technology efficacy labs, where we are testing not just apps, not just eSource and eConsent. We're doing a test right now on a blockchain clinical trial system. and trying to understand how that can virtualize in a hyper secured fashion a lot of the clinical trial systems process. And I think the work that we're doing is entirely virtual. We couldn't have done this 10 years ago without the smartphone, and it's showing us how important our society as a whole, our ability to virtualize our society as a whole, not just the U.S. but globally. We're able to use smartphones and for e-recruitment, for e-consent, for electronic data capture. And I think, it's really fundamental to understand that whether it's a life science company virtualizing trials, or whether it's a clinic, it could be a primary care clinic, it could be a physical therapy or a speech clinic, but these folks today are able to do business only because of the smartphone. And most of what they're doing is the smartphone. I have offices in Washington Heights and in Soho, but in Washington Heights, 70% of people access the internet through their smartphones. Most of the Dominican population there, they don't have laptops, they don't have desktops. They're accessing everything through their smartphone. And now, thanks to just extraordinary digital leaders in life sciences, you're seeing that they have apps that can be downloaded for being able to do a lot of these studies, whether it's some of the big electronic data capture companies, or whether it's some of the big CROs, or whether it's some of the third parties that are offering this software. People can do things that they just couldn't do 10 years ago because of the diffusion of the smartphone and the apps that are driving our business. Now, that there's a huge caveat there, because with clinical trials, there is a lot that still needs on-site work. So I can tell you, whether it's a blood draw or whether it's an infusion, this is not a perfect system. And the same pain is being felt on the hospital side and on the clinic side, so that our physician partners in our research and our hospital partners, our PT, OT, speech partners, they're looking at about 10 to maybe 25% of the reimbursement that they were getting when everything was on site 3 months ago, 4 months ago. And some of them still have not been paid for a lot of the telemedicine visits, just like we're seeing some of the holdup on the clinical trial side. So this virtualization of care that everyone's talking about, and this unprecedented, excruciatingly rapid, really it's a revolution. I mean, we don't use the word revolution in informatics and digital health at all, because it's such a slow process. And you guys see that, right? You see in life sciences, for something to be adopted,
Absolutely.
EDC, electronic data capture in life sciences, it was really kicked off with the .com movement and that phase of our industrial digitization of our society in the 90s, especially the mid 90s, with the World Wide Web more accessible. But we're seeing now an electronic data capture to go from about 5% of studies to about 50% of studies. That took about 10 to 15 years. It didn't happen overnight. This is unprecedented. We're seeing virtual studies, we're seeing virtual care on the hospital and the physician side and the clinic side go from maybe 1 or 2% to 25 to 30 to 50% in some segments of America, depending on how bad and how affected the regions are, in a matter of a month or two.
Yeah.
So my colleagues at New York Presbyterian have done more telemedicine visits over the last month than they did the previous 5 years combined. That's stunning.
Well,
and that's what we're in the midst of right now. It's painful.
It's interesting though, because when you know when the tide goes out, it exposes everything in the tidal zone, right? And this is one of those scenarios where the tide has gone out, and you have leaders and organizations that have been preparing for either the rise of telemedicine or to be able to do things a bit more virtually or to be more digital, and you probably have those that haven't. And one of the things that I think we may see here is organizations that have been well prepared and have established a good culture of being up to date and experimenting and really innovating on the digital side. Those are probably the organizations that are best prepared to handle things like the reimbursement rate on telemedicine or the shock to their revenue, because they actually understand maybe some of the environment that they're stepping into. So you've highlighted a couple times, you've mentioned the word leaders, and I think in situations like this, leadership really comes to the forefront. So have you seen kind of a greater outreach to both HitLab and through Columbia from people looking for expertise and from people really trying to get some guidance on where they can go and how they can get better?
Without a doubt. And I think it's not really something that's pertaining to this particular crisis, but Columbia Business School, when it comes to executive education, when it comes to being able to help sense make, if you will, again, another framework that was particularly utilized during the 2008-2009 financial crisis. Sense making right now is a critical effort that everyone is undergoing, and it requires that we utilize a series of micro decision-making models in order to really understand what the next step is. And it requires a lot of agile thinking to be able to rapidly assess what's going on and make decisions upon new information that's coming in almost hourly. What we're seeing at Columbia Business School is not just interest from the US, but interest around the globe. And with digital health and with the digital health strategy program that's taking place next week, virtually, of course, the idea is that not just, it is certified, it's going to be 22 CME credits for physicians. So physicians in the audience for a 3-day program will earn 22 CME credits. And it's literally being attracting folks from all over the world. So we have people in attendance from Spain, people from South America, from Asia. And it's that sort of leadership that Columbia Business School brings to the table. We have some of the best professors in the world at Columbia Business School and Columbia University that will be in the program, whether it's Frank Lichtenberg, who's done 30 years of research on medical economics of medical technology, and is presenting detailed data on why digital health works and when it works and when digital health is reimbursed, so that if you're a physician in New York or Cleveland and you're leading a system and you're trying to better understand how to gain those reimbursements, this is a program that's going to help them do that. We have Carrie Chan, who's a professor in decision risk and operational modeling, and she's going to provide a very detailed analysis and different constructs and models about how the executive needs to get to a decision point in this crisis mode, and not just as a strategy for this current crisis, but also following the crisis. Yeah. So she's going to be presenting and really helping executives understand the strategic planning process for today that will also leapfrog their competition tomorrow. Finally, we have Adria Califano, one of the leading bioinformaticists in the world. He's literally taking computers and computational biology and helping physicians understand if this drug is going to fit this DNA for that patient.
Yeah. And
his work is renowned, and again, his ability to show which cases of DNA modeling are working today and can help executives get to better care models for this COVID crisis today, not in 5 or 10 years. And that just gives you an idea of the breadth and the depth that Columbia Business School and Columbia University have to offer on a very short order. This program was put together and virtualized about a month or two ago. I mean, it was done in crisis to meet the needs of executives all over the world, and particularly in New York City, around the country. And again, it's a 3-day program. It goes roughly 9 to 6. We are having a virtual cocktail hour. I know Derek would like that. And
you'll need that.
Guilty as charged. Guilty as charged. I mean, it's when you first sent me the agenda for this, it's remarkably impressive. And I mean, you've highlighted some folks from Columbia. I've known Dr. Califano for a number of years. He's basically the person that systems biology at Columbia was built around. And you look through this, and you have leaders from McKinsey, you have digital leaders from Google, from Novartis, you have Glenn DeVries from Medidata. You really have, the lineup over 3 days is exceptional. And, I'm almost more impressed with the fact that they came together so quickly. As you can imagine, we face similar challenges with our annual meeting, and the I think when we're thinking about things from now, you know, the challenge is, how do you put something together that is really useful for your constituents, is really value, and kind of brings together the best and the brightest in a format that people can digest. And now, you know, finding a way to do it virtually, you know, I think people have more of an appetite for that now. And, you know, I think people are much more amenable to seeing things like that. So can you talk a little bit about, you know, kind of some of the challenges of doing this virtually? And this is a little bit self-serving, because Jennifer and I are both going to take notes on what you say, and we're going to use best practices from what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it is tough. I mean, one of the things that we're lucky to have, again, is that you talked about all the folks from Google and Pfizer, J&J, Novartis, who are going to be involved in this. You know, we're lucky because they've used Zoom probably 1,000 times over the last 2 months. So they're well practiced in the art of virtual delivery. And then on the Columbia Business School side, our professors have been using the Columbia Learning Management System now nonstop since about the beginning of the second month of the semester. And the learning management system at Columbia uses Zoom on the front end. So also they're very well practiced in virtual learning. And there are challenges. It is very challenging. I've been teaching remotely as a visiting professor at the Indian Institute of Technology in New Delhi, India, which I've had the fortune of traveling to now 42 times over the last 15 years. Wow. And teaching remotely to a group of graduate students in New Delhi, India, you know, using, at first I was using WebEx and Google Hangouts, and now I'm using Zoom and still using, you know, Google Hangouts, and having 30 or 40 or 50 students on the other end sending you chat messages and keeping them involved for 3 hours in a lecture is not an easy task. It's very important, and we're sending out guidelines to all the faculty in the program next week that ask to keep things interactive. Zoom has a polling function where you can take the temperature of the class and ask questions. We're also asking them to use videos, and we're also mixing up the content a little bit. So we're going to have some lectures on one hand, but then also do some panels on another, do some interviews and some fireside chats. So over the course of each day, the participant is going to be exposed to a number of different formats that will provide them with that sort of fresh, unique, and interactive experience that will keep them alive and well during the long days. We're also giving them a break every 90 minutes to make sure they have a chance to stretch the legs, they have a chance to get up and move around. And again, we know it's virtual, so we know that a lot of folks will be able to move around as they need regardless. And those are just some of the functions that we're trying to put together. As you and Jennifer know, it's complicated. These sorts of programs are certainly, you know, ones that are complex. The audiences are executives, and they expect world class. And that's something that the Columbia Business School executive education staff have been doing now for decades. And so they're trained, and they function like a very tight operating unit. And we're very confident that each individual, each enrollee in the program will come out having learned an extraordinarily unique and relevant set of not just who is involved in this complex digital healthcare system, but what techniques do they need to know to implement these vastly complicated digital health technologies, which they'll also come away knowing. So that understanding which are the most diffusive digital health technologies right now, not ones that are emerging and you're kind of going to be the guinea pig for this thing. Yeah. That's not what we're teaching here. We're teaching these executives which are the tried and true technologies that have been out there, that are bulletproof, that when you sign a contract, you know you're going to get either an app or a piece of software or a device or an algorithm or a voice skill. We can go down the list. Certainly a genetic test or whatever it might be, a visualization of an assay that is absolutely bulletproof. It's been tested. It's been tested for experiential efficacy, for technical efficacy, for clinical efficacy. And that's one of the things that, again, having the research and the rigor of the research at Columbia University really base this off. And yeah, I think that's critical to bring all this to the forefront of these executives.
Yeah. So when we were talking the other day, we talked a little bit about how broad digital health is. I mean, if we just start from the definition that you led with before from Eric Topol, it stretches in so many different directions. And your agenda here has a good amount of folks from biopharma on it. And I thought it might be interesting to talk for a little while about, really where digital health and biopharma has come from and where it's gotten to, because as we discussed, biopharma is a bit of a different animal, right? You have a different regulatory structure. You certainly have had a different corporate structure and a way of engaging with patients. And you have some barriers in terms of either the FDA or clinical studies, et cetera, that don't necessarily pop up in either health or wellness or even in an EHR type development environment. So do you want to talk a little bit about that in terms of where it's come in biopharma and kind of what you're seeing out of some of the leaders in the biopharmaceutical industry on the digital front?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we're seeing that from the historical standpoint, digital has been there for life sciences on a number of levels. And you're right, the program doesn't just touch upon digital on the R&D side, it touches it on the commercial side as well. We're not just talking about the stakeholders, the technologies, the techniques, but as you mentioned in day 3, we have Professor Rita McGrath, again from Columbia Business School, working with Peter Pfeiffer and his team from McKinsey, teaching you the most pertinent strategy models to utilize in building your either department or your unit or your organizational strategy, and then breaking people into teams to develop that. So that third day is about the how and how to implement things. So if you talk to John Carroll, who's the site head for Roche R&D, he'll tell you that when he was able to get back online with his job after taking the program last year, he had all the tools he needed to start affecting a digital health strategy for his unit. And that was an important thing. That's one of the takeaways that we want people to have from this program, is to be able to not just have the who and the what, but also the how. And when you talk about the digital health technologies, past, present, and future for life sciences, both on the R&D side and the commercial side, the program touches upon that. And from the major stakeholders, you talked about Glenn DeVries and metadata. By the way, just a little plug, Glenn DeVries actually started metadata on the Columbia University Medical Center campus in the late 90s.
And it all circles back to Columbia, Stan.
We gotta pitch the school. So but the idea there is that we have a really just an incredible executive to provide the enrollees that kind of intimate knowledge that they're going to have access to. Again, the Q&A function on Zoom is going to be live. It's going to be on. They're going to be able to ask questions that you can't ask if you're watching a traditional YouTube video, reading a book or an article. And that's the experience that we want to give people. We've got folks from Google presenting a case study on some of the most successful marketing campaigns they've ever led in terms of ROI. And so it's again, some of those key functions and some of those key models that we want students to walk away from and take away and be able to see that they've got now new tools and new techniques that they've never even thought of before. And that's the kind of exposure we're trying to give folks. But in terms of the diffusion of digital and life sciences, that's really what, the work at HitLab and all of the 22 years of research at HitLab helps build this program with. And HitLab and the modeling that we use for digital health diffusion and for predicting diffusion. So which technologies, like your AdhereTechs or your MediSafes or your AI Cures, which technologies are going to be the most diffusive? If you look at Information Mediary Corporation and their smart medication adherence platforms, they have an extraordinary lift over the last, they've been around since 2003, of not just R&D adherence and making sure that research and development teams know exactly how their medication is being utilized, but also on the commercial side, they have an amazing lift to help ensure commercial teams that their medication is being properly utilized. And I think in this age of vaccines and treatments for COVID, there has never been a more important time for medication adherence. We're looking at a time where if we have 5 million patients taking pills and only dosing 50% of the regimen, we're going to create a superbug. And so ultimately, it's companies like these these adherent solution folks, where digital technologies, again, 10 years ago, the cost per unit, the cost per patient was $50, $100, $150, and it was just exorbitant. It was impossible for digital health teams to actually utilize this technology. Today, we're talking about a fraction of that because of the diffusion of these technologies. And so now, when you talk to a group like AdhereTech or MediSafe or Information Mediary Corporation or AiCure, you're now talking about fractions of those costs. And that allows the diffusion and the expansion of those technologies in life sciences, and that allows the products to become cheaper to utilize, either for an R&D study or for a commercial integration and a platform on that side. So life sciences has never been at a better time, never seen a better time to actually adopt and integrate these technologies into their frontline, patient-facing and customer-facing platforms. And I think we're seeing that. I think whether it's the Novartis Biome or whether it's some of the stuff that you're seeing coming out of Pfizer, I just, again, read some great news about what they're doing this morning. And then JLabs and a lot of the work that they're doing with their innovation teams and integrating innovation and digital innovation into their operating units. Again, very big learnings from what we saw a generation ago when, at HitLab, we were working with EJ&J as they were spreading and they were really working to integrate electronic data capture across all of the J&J operating companies. And it was amazingly successful. And going back to your talk about metadata, they actually, J&J, through EJ&J's work, actually was responsible for that metadata integration early in 2004, 2005, through the good work that you saw from John Hammett and Betty Robinson and the whole electronic data capture working group that came out of J&J. And I think those small working groups, those small technology evangelists, if you will, sitting within life sciences are critical. And you're seeing that today. Stephen Pitts at JLabs, Robin Roberts at Novartis Biome, they're working hard every day to find ways to not just go out and source and talk about how great digital is. They're working hard at making sure that digital is being integrated in the front line and that they're bringing solutions to their operating unit executives that are going to be useful. They're not going to just detract from the organizational mission. They're going to really help to enable it.
Yeah. And I think, while some of it may be, a little bit more under the radar to the typical biopharma folks, the people that I know in biopharma innovation have all been, crazy for the last, few months, figuring out not only things about new clinical trials, new clinical developments. Basically, they have all kicked into high gear across any one of a number of fronts. And one of the things that you've highlighted that I think would be interesting to talk a little bit about is, imagine that I'm at, pharma company ABC, and I approach HitLab in the next couple of weeks because I want to actually, get an app validated, or we have a piece of technology that we want to put into practice. I think a lot about validation, and you mentioned AiCure, which is one of my favorite New York City companies. I knew Adam Hanino when he started the company, and I remember their kind of landmark paper that showed what their technology could do in terms of clinical trial recruitment, what it did in terms of improving your ability to show significant differences in mental health clinical development. So I'm at a reasonably big-sized pharmaceutical company. I bring you this piece of technology that I think is interesting that my team has brought to me at HitLab. What does the process look like at HitLab, and what do you generally try to do with that? And what's the turnaround like? What is the process like for interacting with you?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, first, it's an empathetic driven process. And I think one of the components of research that we do is very much based in social sciences. And, there's a lot of data science as well. But the design of our research is built around what I was doing early on at Columbia in the 90s, and that was these feasibility studies. So when the internet started and everyone was trying to understand how can a website help improve either our patient flow or our subject flow in clinical research studies, or whatever it might happen on the commercial side, it couldn't be a 1, 2, or 3 year study, because by that time everything was obsolete and you were starting over. The the web movement, the .com, the early mobile movement was rapidly accelerating, just like it is today. And the technological evaluations that we started doing in the mid 90s to help institutions understand the efficacy, especially the economic efficacy, but certainly the overall experiential and clinical efficacy, had to be done in 1, 2, or 3 months. And so what we look at, number one, is how much these technologies can be studied quickly. Are they going to require a rapid, a significant amount of institutional approval? And if so, then we immediately revert to a different model. We will pull the study into our lab instead of into a hospital or into a clinic or a pharmacy. Once we are able to remove the study from an institution, that removes a lot of the socialization that has to happen from an institutional side. And so we study it empathetically from that side of the model. And we also look at what instruments can we use to measure these efficacy points. And so if it's a cardiology study, if it's a study in cancer or oncology, again, some of the instruments that have been peer-reviewed, that have been used in previous NIH studies, we feel comfortable using those. We have to be able to utilize instruments that measure the effect that we're trying to get to, that are going to provide us with an end point. If we can't get to that end point, then it's really not a study we want to do. And then finally, we have to make sure that there is an IRB that we can utilize, because again, we're using, most of our studies that we do are non-institutionally based. So we're not moving the study into a hospital or a pharmacy or a clinic, where it could take, anywhere from 1 to 6 months to gain broader organizational approval and acceptance of doing the study. So by doing the studies remotely in our labs, either in Washington Heights or in Soho, and again, we also have a lab in New Delhi, India, next to the Indian Institute of Technology. So we have this ability to, through non-operational rapid cycle testing, understand the efficacy of the technology before a large institution, whether it's a hospital or a life science company, in this case, obviously life science companies, we can let them know generally within 2 to 4 weeks if the technology they're about to spend 7 or 8 figures integrating into their company, if the technology that they're about to spend 2,000 to 5,000 human capital hours implementing in their company, we can tell them within 30 days whether or not the claims that that technology is making are actually real. And we can begin to measure that through a number of different modeling techniques that we've utilized over the last 22 years, over 670 studies now. And we have the ability to provide life science executives with a read, early signal detection, something they should understand. It's like kind of like a phase to a very small n equals 10, n equals 20 kind of study, to see if there's signal noise about the claims, about that efficacy. Again, it's not just clinical, it's experiential, it's technical, and it's economic. All 4 of those measures are fundamental in terms of making sure that the technology, once it's integrated, is not going to end up hurting operations. It's really going to help enable them.
Yeah. It sounds like you really bring, I think 2 very large elements into the fold. Number one is the expertise, where you've seen some of these things before, and you generally can get a feel and know how to deploy them, how to use them, and give some initial feedback on that. But secondarily, it also seems like you have a really effective way to get this in the hands of the people that are going to use them, and get kind of hard data points for endpoints that matter. Right. And you think about something like COVID, you think about what are some of the things that you genuinely need to measure in terms of giving people any sort of quantitative idea on whether it's working or not. I mean, we don't need to look any further than the clinical trials on hydroxychloroquine, and the real need for statistical validation of is this working versus a placebo, or is it something that seems like it may be working because our data is biased?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Derek. And I think one of the things that is, one of the reasons we have 2 labs in New York City is that New York City as a life science ecosystem, as a digital health ecosystem, is impossible to replicate anywhere in the world. We have 8 million people connected by public transportation hubs. And again, in this day and age, it's hard to work with everyone, but at the same, and we have methods of being able to ship technology that's been sterilized to people to do our studies. And by the way, we've never been busier. This crisis, and because so much of this crisis has brought about the use of new digital tools, we're working 12-hour days. Our team is extraordinary. They're working weekends, nights to be able to meet the needs of what's going on in the digital health community and the life science community, et cetera. And again, it's part of that New York City energy that we have. And if you look at New York City as a life science ecosystem, I certainly don't have to tell you two. You guys know it better than anyone. But we have 3 of the country's top medical schools: NYU, Columbia, Cornell. We have just dozens of extraordinary agencies and institutes and groups working alongside of those academic centers. We have Madison Avenue. We have Wall Street. We have hundreds of life science companies. There are extraordinary lab facilities available, whether it's the Alexandria Launch Labs, whether it's the NYU Bio Labs, the new Alexandria Labs at Columbia Medical Center. There are dozens of lab facilities across the city, and there are more being built every year, which you've seen now with New York City Economic Development Corporation providing, it seems like almost 2 new buildings every year going up for lab facilities. So that life science ecosystem is perfect for digital health. Remember, New York City has over 25 universities and schools, many of them some of the world's best tech schools. Whether you talk about Cooper Union, and others, CUNY, many people don't know this, but CUNY is the largest actual campus-based university in the world, over 600,000 students. And some of the best design schools in the world as well, Pratt and others, Parsons, also New York City based. So it is a phenomenal digital health ecosystem. And we're seeing that. We're seeing that in this crisis. We're seeing a number of groups, whether it's the ones you've already mentioned, like AI Cure, or Adhere Tech, and others, certainly WebMD. These folks are growing at scale and meeting this crisis at scale, along with a lot of the major academic medical centers and others out there. So without a doubt, this ecosystem is built for doing digital health research. And again, our laboratory has benefited from that, in the Columbia Business School program and the Digital Health Strategy program next week has benefited from that. And since we built that 3-day virtual program based upon a lot of the research and a lot of the lessons learned from HitLab and all of those ecosystem partners.
Steve, we have a question from the audience. I'll try to paraphrase it. It says, COVID-19 has put the entire world into crisis mode. Many aspects have been accelerated from years to weeks. Telemedicine, teleworking, FDA regulations, clinical trials. And it says, yet the culprit of this crisis is barely mentioned, the air travel industry, which made Corona become a pandemic in record time. Now, I think whether you agree or not, health screening at the port of departure could bring back safety, but comes at a price. Will it happen, and how? And then I think I would add, and what sort of digital solutions do you see being deployed at we'll call it, instead of point of care, we're calling it point of departure, to get the global economy moving again?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think there's a lot of concern about travel in general and how that's going to bring back normalcy to our society on a lot of levels. And whether it's someone going to see some family, I can't tell you the number of people I've known, I've spoken to over the last 2 months, who've had relatives pass away in other parts of the US or in places like Europe or Israel, and they can't even go to the funeral. And I think those are just absolutely devastating case studies of what we're seeing from this takeaway. I think there's going to be a new normal. I think that, a lot like after 9/11, when we saw a new normal emerge of the securitization of everything from concert venues to stadiums to airports, I think we're going to see a new normal for a while. And again, it's kind of like the old theoretical construct from sociology. You start out with a thesis, right? Which was kind of like what we had 3-4 months ago, which was, all right, everyone was kind of moving around doing what they wanted to do without masks and without testing. And then we were hit with this pandemic like a tidal wave, and that immediately caused an antithesis. So the antithesis of that was, all right, everyone don't move, stay at home, stay safe. And now what we're going to see, and we're already seeing this, again, we're seeing this all over New York City. We're seeing this in other parts of the country, from people I talked to, from Florida to San Diego to Kansas. We're seeing now a synthesis. We're trying to figure out, will this work? This new masked society, where we walk around and everyone wears masks, so those who are infected aren't spreading the disease. And again, most of them don't know they're infected. And then those who are not infected can reduce substantially not getting the disease, again, by practicing basic public health, masking, maybe gloves, no hands to the face and the head. And from a public health standpoint, we're trying to see, is that going to cut the infection rate down from 1 in 1,000 to 1 in 100,000 or something like that. And so we're just beginning to understand the relationship of that new normal. And I can tell you, as a medical technologist, there is no other time in history, not just American history, but in global history, when the world's scientific community, the world's life science community, has mobilized as quickly and as unilaterally as it has over the last 3 months. So whether it's the life science companies, whether it's the medical device companies like Abbott and Medtronic and others, or whether it's the medical supply companies making masks and gloves and other ventilators, things like that, we've seen an extraordinary alignment of resources move that way. And it's been just amazing to see that. And I think we're going to see something relatively soon. And I don't have any insider information. I'm not telling you that I know about a test that's about to come out, but we do know that when we work as a species to accomplish a goal, we get there. And if you look at smallpox and the eradication of smallpox in 1979 through the hard work of Professor Thompson and a lot of the folks in the World Health Organization, as a globe, as a species, we eradicated that disease. And by the way, that was the only time we've eradicated a disease before. Polio, we're very close to eradicating polio. We're almost there, outside of a few hundred folks here and there. But this disease, I'm very optimistic that on the testing side, we're going to get there. I think one of the challenges that we're launching at HitLab is to try to find, first of all, the funding support to launch a major prize competition, but also the tech. We analyze digital health companies all the time. And over the last year, we've seen about a dozen that have extracted and really exploited the tech within the latest smartphones from Apple and Samsung and Google and Android, Lenovo really. We've seen we think that there's a tech group out there, and we're launching a challenge actually today. We're launching the Breakthrough Alliance cohort for this summer is going to be around the validation of a smartphone app that can diagnose COVID. And this isn't something that is maybe 5 or 10 years away. We've had conversations with executives from Apple, Qualcomm, Microsoft, et cetera. They all think this is something that's possible. Using the microphone and the high resolution cameras in these phones with maybe an app to walk through the diagnostic, we think that we can actually align a lot of the major tech companies, major life science companies, to create this challenge, to create this class, this cohort being launched at HitLab in conjunction with the New York City EDC and the Breakthrough Alliance, which is, again, the Breakthrough Alliance is a consortium of companies focused on developing and scaling breakthrough digital health technologies. We think that there is a real chance that we can do this. So when it comes to airports and screening, I'm pretty confident that if today is May 5th, happy Cinco de Mayo, like you mentioned earlier, Derek, by July 5th, August 5th, we'll have a rapid screening, a rapid testing device, either through a smartphone app or through a rapid strep type test with a swab, or with a rapid blood prick and screen test that will be able to detect this in real time. So not 24 hours, not 72 hours, but in real time, so that if you're going through airport security, you're going to be tested before you board the plane. If you're going through a stadium to watch a football game, you're going to be tested in real time. If you're going through a venue at security, you're going to be tested in real time. And then possibly even restaurants and theaters, other groups like that, would be able to have a rapid testing model put together. And again, smartphones, I feel, in terms of diffusion, and again, that's my core theoretical construct that I do my research around, is diffusion.
Yeah.
I think we've got to focus on the smartphone, Jennifer and Derek. I think that if we are worried about everyone on the planet, not just the folks in the wealthier Asian countries and North America and Europe, the smartphone is our only way out of this as a globe, because the smartphone, especially the latest version of the Apple phone and the iPhone rather, and the Pixel from Google, Samsung's Galaxy, as well as Lenovo's Droid, I think that is the only way out of this, because those phones can be mass produced. They're already mass produced. There's hundreds of millions of them around the globe. We know that globally, the cell phone penetration, the cell phone adoption rate, diffusion rate is upwards of 75%. We know that smartphone adoption rate is upwards of about 50%. We know that the latest version of these phones has an adoption rate of roughly 10%. So if we're going to really create a testing platform for the bottom billion, we need to utilize the smartphone as that platform. Public health nurses from Brazil to Ghana to India can rapidly pick up the latest smartphone if they don't already have it, and having a test that comes through that smartphone would be by far the fastest way to be able to do global testing. I do think that airports will be safe in 3 to 4 months.
Yeah, a few weeks ago, I even participated in a beta sort of analysis study using my iPhone and speaking certain terms and holding a tone for a certain length of time. And it was trying to assess, sort of, I guess, your breathing capacity and looking for signals that that you might be infected with COVID. And so I was just doing my part to assist research and data gathering, but it was fascinating. And the different things that you could tell just from holding a tone and speaking into your phone.
If we could get Pokemon Go to what seemed like more than 1 billion people in a span of something about 2 weeks, we've already shown how quickly, digital penetrance can occur. And I would argue that this is probably a little bit more important than Pokemon Go in terms of both our economy and our health and everything else. So, it's interesting. The infrastructure is there. And many times it takes a challenge like this or a situation like this to realize the other things that you can do with it, right? You have these resources sitting around. Everybody has, a piece of technology in their hand that everybody likes to reference is many times more powerful than all of the computing power on any of the Apollo missions in the space shuttle, right? So if we're able to go to the moon with something that's better than our smartphone, we should think about the ways that can impact our health and really the rest of our day, especially in an era where you have clinical consequences for the better part of the globe, right? And like our questioner had said, our airline travel habits may change, but the ability to go anywhere in the world in less than 24 hours isn't going to go away, right? We're always going to have the ability to travel anywhere that we need to go, and that's going to mean that microbes can travel with us. And, one of the things that we need to do is think about, for the future, what are the ways that we can protect ourselves against that? So we've got about 5 minutes left. I don't know if we don't seem to have any more comments in the Q&A. One of the questioners asked who the leaders are in developing the smartphone COVID rapid testing. So we can go through a couple of those if you want, or if you'd like to, you can send them to me in an email a little bit later, and I'll highlight them afterwards on our LinkedIn and Twitter posts. So just for everyone in the audience that didn't see the chat, with these discussions, we follow all of them later in the day with a series of links and posts and some resources that disseminate some of the things that Stan and our guests and us talk about. Because we want people to be able to access stuff that they remembered and to be able to go back to this and really dig into the stuff that came up on the call that they thought was important. So we'll definitely highlight this on the way out. So we've got about 5 minutes left. Stan, the floor is yours. You've already given us kind of a bit of a roadmap for where we want to go for the future. I'll highlight again that one of the links that we're going to include is the registration link for your course next week, which again, I'll include the registration link. I'll include the agenda because it's terrific. Is there anything else that you want to highlight? If anybody needs to or wants to get in touch with HitLab, how is the best way to get in touch with you?
Yeah, just connect with me on LinkedIn, and that's probably the easiest way to go. And going back to your question about the digital technologies that are at the forefront of who we think would be at the forefront of this COVID testing through a smartphone app. That's why we're launching this cohort today from HitLab and the Breakthrough Alliance. Again, NewYorkBIO is a huge partner with the Breakthrough Alliance as well, along with New York City EDC, Merck, and there's numerous other life science leaders out there. And so but really the idea is that there are no companies today that have smartphone apps to diagnose COVID.
Yep.
And that's what we're trying to align people to do. We're trying to not only align through providing the validation pathway, HitLab as a first step, but then it would have to be a validated app through a regulatory authority, either EMA or FDA. And the prize that we're launching would be awarded to the first team or company or group that was able to show that it downloaded, there had been 1 million successful downloads and people using it in public health campaigns globally. So I think what we're trying to do is galvanize and publicize this entity, this idea, and this technological intervention as a real possibility. This is not something, again, that's a 1 in 1,000 or 1 in 10,000 kind of opportunity. We feel, and this isn't just myself or my colleagues and research scientists at the lab, these are executives from Qualcomm, Apple, Google, Microsoft. These are some of the leading telecom and computer science engineers in the world who we've connected with and talked to over the last several weeks now, and who feel that this is a real opportunity. And it's not a layup. We're not saying this is something that is an absolute. It's not even like a traditional vaccine or a traditional blood test. This is something that's going to be more like a half-court shot in basketball. This is like a Hail Mary in football. This is more like a 1 in 100 chance. And I think that's what we're saying here. But in this age right now, where Bill Gates is building 7 factories for vaccine production, knowing that only 1 or 2 of those factories, and again, this is at a cost of about $8 or $9 billion US, only 1 or 2 of those factories will actually work for whatever vaccine we come up with, because these vaccines have different manufacturing processes, et cetera. In this day and age where Bill Gates is using his money to affect change and get ready and try to accelerate the diffusion of medical technology through that kind of foresight and thought, I think we're trying to do what we know best, which is digital interventions, and we're trying to use the connectivity, not only to our research models and our researchers and research scientists that we have globally from New York to New Delhi, but also with the medical technologists, which, by the way, diffusion involves Madison Avenue. So for all the folks watching from Madison Avenue, please get in touch with me. We need your help. If it weren't for folks who understood how to run campaigns and publicity and advertising and messaging, smallpox would have never been eradicated. Most of the countries where smallpox was endemic, the last 5 countries where smallpox was endemic in the 1970s, included Ethiopia, they included India, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. And it took massive marketing techniques and campaigns to help people understand that these vaccines and certainly the inoculation for smallpox was a good thing. And this is what we're talking about for this COVID smartphone diagnostic cohort within the Breakthrough Alliance. We really need your help for that, and we do think it's feasible. And I know we're at the end of the time here. Thank you both, Jennifer and Derek, for having us and having me, I guess, and then thank you, NewYorkBIO, and the audience as well.
Thanks to you. Thank you so much for joining us today. Very informative, really appreciative. Everyone's going to be looking to see what's next, right? We're downloading on our smartphones to see how we test ourselves and help solve the problem. I invite everyone to join us next week, May 12th. Our guest is Chris Garabedian from Zontogeny. We're going to talk about early stage investing and looking at New York and early stage company investing. So thank you, Stan. We appreciate it. Everyone have a great day.
Thanks Stan.
for joining us.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for tuning in to New York Bio's virtual breakfast series. Join us every Tuesday at 9 a.m. for more discussions with leaders from across the healthcare spectrum. For more information on New York Bio, please visit us at www.newyorkbio.org.